Outreach Church. I'm so glad to be with you once more. We're preaching through a series on the kingdom of God, and we're camped out in Matthew 5 right now. I'm going to pray and get us going. God, I thank you so much for these stories which transcend time and culture and history, even though they are deeply embedded in it. I pray that our hearts and minds would be open to attend and say yes to the things that we hear from you that are within this text. I pray that my teaching would be clear and understandable and helpful and a blessing for everyone who is listening. And I ask that all these things might be done through the Spirit in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, Matthew 5, we're in verses 33 through 42 today. And boy, oh boy, here we go. Jesus says, again, you have heard it said from the ancients, you shall not swear falsely, but pay your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, make no oaths, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footrest of God, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Do not swear by your head, for you do not have the power to make one hair white or black, but let your word be yes or no. Anything beyond this is evil. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not stand against evil. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. Whoever plucks you out and takes your shirt, give him your coat also. If anyone compels you to carry his things for 1 Roman mile, carry for him 2. Give to him who asks you, and do not turn away from one who wants to borrow from you. All right, so first off, just right off the bat, acknowledging this is another place that Christianity, by and large, does not follow the teachings of Jesus, right? From the top, we've got oaths. We make oaths all the time. A lot of us raised in the school system made pledges of allegiance every day. Those are oaths to a piece of fabric, which is pretty wild. We make oaths when we get married, most of us, if you have been married. And if you're ever in court or being arraigned or any of the above, you also make oaths. So we don't hold to this teaching in our society, in our Christianity, which is super interesting. Quakers, love me some Quakers, and Mennonites do hold to this teaching, and President Franklin Pierce also, at his making an oath to become president, chose to make an affirmation instead of an oath. So there are people who hold to this word being, true and authoritative, but most of Christianity does not. So just putting that out there in the open. So what's the problem with oaths? Jesus says, this used to be a thing in Torah, and it absolutely is a thing in Torah, and we see it all through the Psalms. David always talks about he's going to fulfill his oaths in the presence of the assembly. God tells us to bring him our nidarim, our oaths, our promises. So what's going on here? I want us to think about this story of the Sermon on the Mount again, because we tend to just like the painting, right? Has Jesus sitting on a rock in his nice Greek outfit, bizarre, with his beauty queen scarf. And a couple people are sitting around in rapt attention, right, with the glowing light off their face. But the end of Matthew 4 says who's there. People from Syria up north are there. People from the Galilee, which is where he is at the moment, are there. People from the Decapolis are there, which are the 10 Roman cities that were planted to colonize or to attempt to colonize Israel. So they're there, the Romans are there, and also people from Jerusalem and from the south, the desert. Everybody's there. Now, it already says the Decapolis, so we already know at least assimilated Jewish people were there into Roman culture, but it also definitely means, with the crowd of that size, that Roman officers were there. The Roman military is not gonna go, oh, it's just some street preacher, I'm sure everything's fine. That's not the way that oppressive regimes keep their claws in place. They have to keep tabs on who is popular in the culture, what's happening in the society. And there's no way, with the amount of messiahs who had come and gone before Jesus and revolts that had sputtered out before Jesus, that they would have just said, yeah, it's all good. So Romans are in attendance. And when you have an oppressive empirical force in attendance who can haul you off to prison at any time, you develop a way of speaking in which you're still able to communicate your truth to your audience, but also you have to do it in a way that does not raise the alarms of the, the government officials who are in attendance. I have a pastor friend who was a pastor in Egypt during the Arab Spring, and all the time government officials, spies, would be in his congregation where he and others were preaching, waiting to hear if there was anything that they would say that could enable them to arrest him or anybody in the congregation. So they had to figure out how to both speak to their people and have this shielded language. And I am of the strong opinion that this is what is happening in this story and these teachings that Jesus is telling his audience. So what's the deal with oaths, right? He prefaces it by talking about Torah again, right? Which, if you can kind of imagine, might have made the Roman officials there turn up the white noise sound in their head because they don't care about Torah and all the weird customs of the Jewish people. But what kind of oaths is Jesus upset about here? What's going on? Why is it bad to swear to do something when we see it happening in Torah? So here's my hypothesis that I did research on, not just dreaming out of the blue. There is a practice in the first century in the ancient Mediterranean in which the Caesar, either when he has colonized a new area or when he has come to the throne, he enacts loyalty oaths. And oaths in the Roman culture involve pledging your absolute allegiance to the emperor and all of his descendants, absolute loyalty. And then it involved the killing or the burning or the mutilating or the throwing in the sea of an animal or some kind of object to also invoke a curse upon yourself if you ever break that loyalty. And so it's common in these places that as you get taken over by a new empire, the government shows up, the oppressor shows up and demands that you sign this treaty and make this oath and pledge yourself to the new emperor and that you will never revolt or else a curse be done to you. So you can imagine the stress, gray area galore, right? Who knows what's going to happen to your family if you don't make the oath, if you don't sign the oath. We know it was commanded of both male and female inhabitants in a Roman colony. This would be a major issue of the time. Do you swear your loyalty oath, horkos is called, to Caesar? What do you do? You're not supposed to have gods other than God, and Caesar declares himself a god. Do I protect my family and it's just words and don't worry about it and just move along, stay comfortable, make sure that the Romans aren't checking on you? Or do you take a stand and risk something happening to your family? Jesus here makes it clear. There's all sorts of ways, okay, maybe I won't swear by God, right? So instead I'll swear by Jerusalem, or I'll only swear by myself, or something that's not as sacrilegious because I don't actually have allegiance to Caesar, so I'll pick something random to swear by. And Jesus says, no, there's no loopholes. We're not people who give our oath of fealty to anyone other than God. And this has massive impact for us in America, in which Christianity is so conflated with nationalism and God is for America and all of that narrative. Jesus kicks out the side door and says, no, we don't do that, period. You can't find some loophole by which it's okay to give this pledge of allegiance. It's not acceptable, which is super fascinating and amazing that he says that, even though he prefaces it with this thing about Torah in front of the Romans. And so maybe that's why directly after we have these other teachings. So he says, you have heard it said, maybe to placate them, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That was intended in Torah to be a limiting command, as in if somebody accidentally shoots an arrow and takes out your eye, you are not allowed to behead the person, right? If you are seeking retributive justice, it must be in, it must match the crime, right? We have words for that also in American legal system. Unfortunately, it doesn't always get carried out that way, but that's what we have. Okay, so he's saying, you already know this, limit your response to the level of offense that was given, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not stand against evil. It's really hard for those of us who are in the justice community. Do not stand against evil. Are you kidding me? Just acknowledging that tension. Might not love it. But Jesus says, whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. Whoever plucks you out and takes your shirt, give to him your coat also. If anyone compels you to carry his things for 1 Roman mile, carry for him 2. Give to him who asks you, and do not turn away from one who wants to borrow from you, not for you. That would be nice. Okay, so I've heard one take on this, and I'm going to present another as well. So, you know, you can choose whichever one delights your soul or makes sense to you. But the teaching that I've heard for each of these is that Jesus is, again, still trying to show how you walk, how do you do kingdom when you live in a society which is not utopian, right? If everything was going the way it was supposed to in Torah, slaves are getting freed every so many years. There's no more debt that get taken away so many years. Produce is being shared amongst those who have need. Aliens, orphans, and widows are being taken care of, just like the text says that they're supposed to be, right? That is basically a utopia. And you can imagine that it's easier to live in kingdom, you know, the things in Isaiah 1, setting prisoners free, the opening of power, healing of people, etc., etc. When you live in that kind of society, and it can feel like, well, how am I supposed to do any of that? How am I supposed to renew the, how am I supposed to bring this kingdom, giving freedom to people and the opening of power for people who have had their power taken away, if I myself am being oppressed, right? So Jesus speaks to that. He doesn't say, well, just pull up your bootstraps and do better and you'll figure it out. He gives clear examples of how to do that, both calling us forward and acknowledging the situation that's happening. So a couple different things. He says how to respond to violence, being the first one. So if you are hit on one side of your face, turn the other one. Does that mean that we're just love punishment? No, goes the theory. The theory is that you wipe with your left hand, as most of us are righties. You wipe with your left hand. And so if someone is slapping you with their, on the one cheek with their left hand, they're slapping you with the hand that has all sorts of grossness on it, right? I mean, not that you wander around with feces on your hand, but there was something culturally extra degrading about that. And so the teaching goes that Jesus says, hey, if someone's going to hit you, challenge them to hit you with their honorable hand. Like, you might not have the power to change what is happening, but try to receive it with dignity and challenge and resist, and say, hey, if you're going to hit me with your hand that isn't filthy. Hit me with your hand with which you do things in the world, in society, right? So that's the first thing. Number 2 is, this is reminding me of like my middle school lessons on the American Revolution, the army could take what they want from you at any point in time, down to the clothes that you were wearing. I've heard it taught a lot that like people at that time only had one article of clothing. I think that's a little bit extreme to say. There were lots of strata of society. Not everybody was like the village beggar just wandering around with one like potato sack on, right? They had potatoes. They were very rich Jewish people. There were middle class Jewish people, and there were poor Jewish people. And to assume that none of them had any more clothes other than what they're wearing is a little bit bizarre. And also that they wouldn't be able to go and purchase another one. It wasn't like Forever 21 was down in the marketplace and you could just go and buy 50 shirts for $3 each. But people usually had more than one item of clothing. So what's going on here? They could say the Roman army doesn't need your shirt though, right? They have a specific uniform. They have their own armor, and there is not something that they would need your cloak for. They've got a big centurion cloak, right? So this is about humiliation. This is about seeing that someone has some agency and wanting to take them down a peg. This is the officer telling Sandra Bland that she needs to put her cigarette out for no reason, right? So Jesus says, super crazy, and hopefully the second interpretation that I give will be more helpful. But Jesus says, if someone's going to take your shirt, take off your coat as well, and now you're naked, right? They don't have a lot of other garments going on. And what's super interesting is that while nudity was normative, or more normative, and didn't have aspersions cast on it in Greece and Rome, it was extremely offensive to be nude, just like in our culture that we have today, and it would be very distasteful. And so Jesus is saying, hey, you want to humiliate me? Look, I'm beyond being humiliated, and this might bother you more than it bothers me. And I'm just going to point out and make as public as possible the fact that you were trying to humiliate me. Again, I'll give another interpretation of this in one sec. Third thing, if anyone compels you to carry his things for 1 Roman mile, carry for him 2. Okay, I translated that a little bit differently than you might have read it before. It's because the Greek word there, that might have been translated go with you, or go with them. It's a specific word, and that's used for like being a porter for someone, having to carry their stuff for them, having to take a letter for someone. And so the idea is a Roman could be walking past your farm and he doesn't want to carry his backpack anymore. And so you might be, I don't know, delivering some sheep babies. And he might say, hey, Jew, come over here, carry my stuff. And you'll have to leave your sheep, which is horrible economic situation, right? And so Jesus says, go with them 2 miles. Now, I've heard the teaching that there is a rule against Roman soldiers being able to compel people to go 2 miles, because apparently that would disrupt society or anger people too much. 1 mile, which by the way is a Roman measurement, so Jesus is specifically speaking about Roman occupation here. It's not just talking about a friend who's like, oh, hey, Tom, come on a walk with me, and you don't want to go. A stadion is the regular local measurement. A mile is a Roman thing. That means 1,000 paces, which is not the same as our current mile. So I've heard, and I was not able to find research for it, but it could still be true, that Roman soldiers were only allowed to have you go 1 mile, not 2. And so the idea is be so cheerful and chipper in your acts of peaceful resistance, carrying their stuff, oh sure, that you go marching past the 1 mile point, and he has to the Roman soldier has to scurry to catch up with you and be like, oh no, take it off, because they don't want to be in trouble with their captain. Again, that could be true, but here's a different way that I want to flip the reading of these teachings. So all of this we can process and make sense if we are more individualist, But I want us to think from a communal worldview standpoint and think about hospitality culture. So for us in America, if a homeless person, an unhoused person on the side of the road asks you for something, it is normative to ignore them. You may not. I hope that you may not, and I hope the same for myself, but that is the norm. Drive right on by, don't make eye contact, they're probably dangerous, right? That is not this culture. This culture is someone comes walking into your town and the village fights over who is going to house that person. Normally I have good things to say about individualism. This is not one of those times. This is still the case in many Middle Eastern countries or Central Asian countries, where if you say, oh, nice car, they will try to give you their car because it's their honor and joy to be generous to you. And so one author I was reading had to have their friends step in and argue with the host for an hour that he did not need the car from this Bedouin family. And please keep the car, he doesn't really like it, which just totally blows our mind, right? So somebody asking for a piece of clothing in that culture, oh, of course, here, have this too, and this too, and this too, and this too. That's normal. Oh, you need something? I'm there. Let me do this for you, and this for you, and this for you. So in my opinion, Jesus is doing something even more radical than saying engage in peaceful resistance. In my opinion, Jesus is calling us to treat our enemies in the exact same way that we would treat everybody else. And the expectation is that we're treating people with abundant generosity and abundant goodwill and incredible hospitality and an extreme detachment from your own possessions because you know that somebody else has got your back if you have a need. That's the culture that hopefully we can try to create. And that's what Jesus calls us to treat even our enemies this way, even our oppressors this way, even the guy who beat up your mom last week. If he asks for something, you treat him just like your neighbor who says that they need to go, well, here's extra, etc. That is what Jesus is calling us to, in my opinion. Of course, he's about to speak about loving our enemies, which we'll talk more about next week. But what a challenge for us. We think about the people who maybe you don't think of them as enemies, maybe you do, but the people who are hard to love, the people who are difficult for you, and imagine treating them with an abundant generosity and hospitality, no matter what. It's severely challenging, right? So I'm going to pray because we need the Spirit of God to help us in this endeavor, to change our hearts, that we might even be open to thinking about such a wild, radical thing. So here we go. God, I thank you so much that you are a God who gives us wildly radical, hopefully exciting callings. I thank you that even in whatever culture we find ourselves, we are not to give oaths of loyalty to the current system, that it's not our job to say, yeah, that's good, I can give my allegiance to that, but rather to strive to create, hold true to our values of hospitality, of generosity, of loving people in physicalized, very present ways. I pray that you would enable us to do that with ourselves, with those who you have given us to love and care for in our families, that we wouldn't overlook them if we tend to be more outward focused. And I pray also that you would give us the heart to love those outside of our circle, those who we want to draw a line and say, you're not my people. I don't have to love you in this way. I don't have to speak kindly to you because I've seen your bumper stickers and I don't appreciate it. I pray that you would radically transform us so that we would be able to live out this calling that you have given to us. I pray for your Spirit to come and move in our community as we think about how to walk this out and wrestle with it and wrestle with our hearts. Help us in our unbelief. Help us to say yes to you. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, if you are not used to joining us, this week is the perfect week too, because we're having online discussion only instead of also in person. So you can email Refuge Pullman and get the form is on our website, refugepullman.com, and you can get the Zoom link from there. And if you're in the Palouse, we'd love to see you at our in-person services still. Those are still happening if you're confused. If you would like to live out generosity by contributing to our values of a living wage for our employees, please consider investing in our community through your tithes and gifts. That link is also in the big give button on our website. Okay, y'all, have a wonderful week. I'll see you next week. Bye.